Hey guys, today we're going to talk about something unusual called avant-garde music. I'm going to start with my own little composition. Yeah, I make my own digital synthesizers and analog synthesizers. Some people find it annoying. Some people don't think it's music, but avant-garde means it's experimental, it's cutting edge, and not all experiments work out. Anyway, let's get to the records. Why am I talking about avant-garde music today? Because, well, I saw a video the other day by Mazzy who talked about avant-garde music, and I've got a lot of records in this category. So let's get into it, shall we? So, Mazzy made a video about avant-garde records, and it was inspired by a guy named Sounds Strange, the Irish guy, because he talked about this record, Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. Let me clarify and add just a few little factoids about Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, Le Sacre du Printemps. Here's what was maybe missed in some other discussions. This is not an opera, it's a ballet. And it had a reputation for sort of starting a riot in 1913 when it was first presented. The riot, I would say, is more of a reaction to what was going on stage. The visuals that people were seeing, in addition to the music. The ballet. Parisian audiences going to see ballet on a Sunday afternoon matinee, they're used to seeing pretty girls in tutus dancing gracefully around, and what they get is this pagan ritual, people in native garb coming out and stomping up and down, and it's nothing like a ballet they were used to. And the rite of spring, the ritual, is a human sacrifice. So, spoiler alert, the end of this ballet is they bring out a nice, beautiful young teenage girl and they kill her on stage, human sacrifice to the pagan gods. And the Parisian audiences are like, what did we just witness? And that was, the riot is also precipitated by the ballet itself. This is Bernard Haitink conducting London Philharmonic. Nice copy I got for $1 at a thrift store. The other record that prompted me to make this video is, here's the back. Anybody recognize it? Are you ready? Here's the front. That's right, John Zorn, Naked City. I got it on LP. Mazzy was jonesing for it on LP. This is the reissue. If you had the original LP from 1989, it's worth $100. This was reissued a couple years ago. I grabbed it, $25. John Zorn, definitely an avant-garde experimental saxophone player in this sort of New York scene. This is an amazing record on many levels. I initially got into it because I'm such a big fan of Bill Frisell, the guitar player. So I gotta like have everything Bill Frisell does, but he's got so much stuff I can't buy it all. The cover, famous photograph by Ouija, who in New York ran around following the cops and looked for gangland slaying. So this is called Corpse with Revolver. Actual corpse, actual revolver. Oh, the title, Naked City. Naked City was the title of a cop TV show in the late 1950s. So very gritty, you know, following these grisly murders based on true stories. Somebody got murdered, cops found him, you know, kind of like CSI Today, but I think based on true stories. And the end of the show would always have, you know, after they solve the crime, the announcer would say, there are 8 million stories in the Naked City. This has been one of them. Just, it's cool, sort of film noir, gritty, underground New York. So in addition to Bill Frisell, there's other great players on here. Fred Frith, Joey Barron, Wayne Horvitz. Those guys are all staples of the New York underground scene. I want to show you the other interesting player on that record, which is a Japanese guy. I'll call him a vocalist. I won't call him a singer. I'll call him a vocalist. Yamatsuka Ai. His name is always misspelled or spelled differently. He has a band called The Boredoms you probably haven't heard of, but these are vocal stylings unlike anything you've ever seen before. Let's see if we can focus in on this thing. That's the vocal stylings of Yamatsuka Ai playing with the John Zorn band. This is what I call challenging music not everyone likes to listen to. There's Bill Frisell. Anyway, that's a taste of John Zorn's Naked City. What are we listening to in the background here? Pierre Boulez. We might talk about him later. Pierre Boulez, very well known as a composer and also a conductor. Did a few collaborations with Frank Zappa. Just got this yesterday for $1 at Record Surplus on Santa Monica. This music is challenging and hard to listen to. Not everybody likes it, not everybody gets it, not everybody agrees it's music. I put on this record this morning and of course my wife says, "Is the cat walking across the piano again?" I said, "Hey, I got this for $1." And she said, "I think you overpaid." That's a little back and forth humor we have. I came home from work yesterday, she was listening to Hall & Oates' Greatest Hits. I'm like, this is a great record too. There's enough taste and music styles for everybody. How about this guy? Edgar Varèse. It's pronounced Varèse. Edgar Varèse. Actually, his first name is probably Edgard. He didn't create that much music. He did something like 10 or 12 pieces that he published during his lifetime. So you buy 1 or 2 of his records, you got the whole collection. Ionization is a really famous piece that is all percussion. It's like 13 percussion instruments. Check this out. Frank Zappa, highly influenced by Edgard Varèse. Frank Zappa did a concert of all of his music. You can check that out on YouTube. I don't think it came out on a record. Speaking of Frank Zappa, we're hearing composition by Pierre Boulez. Pierre Boulez did a concert with Frank Zappa on Frank Zappa's music. Frank Zappa's going to appear in this video multiple times. Frank Zappa, kind of the leader of the avant-garde, crossing over into the pop world. I mean, you could go see him play in the 70s and he would do Igor Stravinsky and the Allman Brothers and Led Zeppelin and Zappa all in the same concert. So Zappa, definitely a promoter of challenging experimental music, and not everybody loves it. It takes some concentration to try to get into it and understand it and see what type of effect it has on you listening to it. I'm going to mention another piece of music that Mazzy mentioned in his music, in his video. John Cage, one of the most famous people of the avant-garde experimental music movement. So John Cage did this piece called 4:33, which is 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, and people are like, "Well, that's stupid. Anybody can call that music." Well, I just want to clarify. That piece of music is really a piece of performance art. The art is the way the piece was performed. Piano player John Cage walks into the auditorium with the audience, sits down at the piano, and doesn't do anything for 4.5 minutes. The performance art is the audience's reaction. The audience sitting there going, what's going on here? Is he, the audience is sitting there fidgeting nervously in their seats, and the tension created in that room of, what am I supposed to do? I'm a polite classical music fan. I guess I'm just supposed to sit here quietly waiting for something to happen, or can I just get up and go, what the hell's going on here? Where's the music? So that tension, that audience experience, that's the piece. That's what 4:33 is. So that is a piece of performance art, and that's a very interesting, cool piece of crossover between music, art, performance art, experimental art that challenges the audience's preconceptions of what art is supposed to be. So that's a very famous seminal work in avant-garde art of the 20th century. I don't have it on record. I don't think he recorded it. What's the point? I mentioned this record because of what's inside it, what's printed inside it. Frank Zappa, Mother of Invention, Freak Out on Verve. I got this for $1 at a thrift store, yeah. What's in here? 150 names, and I'm not going to read them all, but Frank lists his influences. He says, these are people who've contributed to make our music what it is. Please do not hold it against them. It's not all musicians. It's people from all walks of culture. Everybody from John Lennon to Jules Pfeiffer to Ravi Shankar to Bill Evans to Johnny Guitar Watson. I'm not going to read them all, but in terms of the avant-garde musicians that influenced Frank Zappa, Igor Stravinsky is listed in here. Karlheinz Stockhausen, one of the giants of 20th century experimental music. He did all kinds of stuff from early electronic music to just music composed for regular instruments. So this is Stockhausen's complete piano sonatas, 2-record set. Very rare and hard to find any of his music on LP, so I would have rather had some of his more weirder electronic stuff, but I found this for a decent price at a record store recently. Oh, in addition to being mentioned on Frank Zappa's record, Stockhausen is one of the only music composers pictured on a Sgt. Pepper album cover. He's one of those 40 faces on there that most people don't know who they are. And I think he was a big influence on John Lennon and Yoko Ono and the whole Revolution Number 9 kind of weirded out experimental music. So Stockhausen, I'm always on the lookout for his stuff, and this is really all I have on LP. Stockhausen. Okay, who else did Frank Zappa mention? Don't move. I gotta run over here. Also mentioned by Frank Zappa, Charles Ives, America's most famous composer that none of you have ever heard of. His records are easy to find. They're in thrift shops all over the place. There's a lot of recordings of his music. His music is all orchestral. It's not electronic. He lived from like 1870-ish to 1950. And he knew his music was so bizarre that nobody would care about it, and he went and got himself a nice job in the insurance business, and he said, my family's not going to starve just because I make this weird music. He was avant-garde before it was cool to be avant-garde. He was not a part of any musical movement. He was not part of the school of, Vienna or anything. He went to Yale, studied music, and then started a successful insurance business. But he was very big on polytonality. He would have two groups of musicians on the stage at the same time playing what appeared to be two different keys and melodies. His music was considered too hard to play by some musicians of his time. It's like, this stuff I can't play this. What are you doing? At one piece of his music has a piano player grab a 2x4 and smash it on the keys in 1890 or whatever. That was considered pretty bizarre. But he was not really adopted by the intelligentsia of his day. So he really didn't get discovered until late in life. Anyway, Charles Ives, big fan of him. And those are the three guys mentioned in the Zappa thing. Who else do I have here? Minimalism. Philip Glass is the most famous minimalist of all time, but Steve Reich, close behind. This is music for 18 musicians. Just was re-released on the Nonesuch label. This is a numbered copy, number 3436. This would be a minimalist piece that's kind of repetitive, and the different sections kind of go in and out of phase with each other. Nonesuch Records has turned into really a premier label of leading edge stuff. I should do a whole video on Nonesuch Records. Here's another one. John Adams, also sort of a minimalist style composer. This is older on Nonesuch, probably from the 80s, 1985. But this is very thick, heavy vinyl, heavy cardboard. None Such does a great sale once a year, half off everything. So I picked up this for probably 18 bucks instead of 35 bucks, something like that. On the hype sticker, one of the handful of 20th century pieces that can rightly claim to have altered the course of Western music, by some guy named Schwartz. So very influential, famous early piece of minimalist music. What else do I have? An old record on None Such when they had the old label. These None Such records, before they really, were as famous as they are now, a lot of these are inexpensive. You can find some of None Such stuff in thrift shops. So Charles Warren doing Times Encomium for synthesized and processed synthesized sound. Very bizarre, weird stuff. Cool stuff. Okay, I've got tons of so-called avant-garde type music on that other format you guys remember called compact disc. Most of this stuff is when I worked at Philips and got super discounts on everything. I'm not going to go through all these. There's a million things here. The Balanescu Quartet, kind of maybe trying to capitalize on the popularity of the Kronos Quartet at the time. This has a piece by David Byrne from the Talking Heads on it. I don't remember what it is. I haven't listened to it in forever. Here is a great composer, Toru Takamitsu, Japanese guy. I don't know if this is his most famous piece. Quatrain is actually pretty famous. I'll see if I can dig up some more Takamitsu in this pile of stuff. Here is a great composer you guys should be aware of, avant-garde, Glenn Branca. What do we have? His 5th Symphony and his 9th Symphony. His music is like these massive clusters of droning. One of his pieces is like for 100 electric guitars, just this massive wall of sound. Did he die recently? I don't remember. So I got a couple of pieces of Glenn Branca. His stuff is not as hard to find as some of these other things. One of the most famous composers of the 20th century. You guys have all heard his music and you all were freaked out by his music, but you don't know who he is. György Ligeti. Not Ligeti, it's Ligeti. And there's more of his stuff. Ligeti, Atmospheres. Was featured in the soundtrack to 2001 Space Odyssey. Kubrick's wife heard Ligeti on the radio on some BBC show. She came home and said, "Stanley, you got to check out this guy Ligeti." So Stanley Kubrick put Ligeti in at least 2 of his movies. Was also used in The Shining, like some of the scarier scenes. So Ligeti is one of these avant-gardists who said, let's just throw away melody, let's just throw away rhythm, we don't need that, we got new stuff to do. So his music, a lot of it is these massive clusters of notes that just kind of hang in the air and like kind of a choral sound. And go watch the scary scenes in what do you call it, The Shining, and you'll understand what this sounds like. So Ligeti, I got a bunch of his records and they are very challenging to listen to. How about Schnittke? I just like saying Schnittke, Alfred Schnittke. How about Pierre Boulez again, conducting Ligeti? What is this? A couple of concertos. Here's a classic piece of 20th century music. Messiaen. I'm going to try to pronounce the French name right. Olivier Messiaen. And he has this giant piece of music called the Turangalila Symphony. This would be sort of a more accessible piece of avant-garde music. Check that out on YouTube or whatever. It's a big, bombastic piece of music with a lot of different tonal colors and a lot of bright sounding instruments. A lot of this music is very dark and scary and ominous. This has some brighter, less frightening parts to it. It's still a big, bizarre piece of music. What else do I got? Lutoslawski, some more Ligeti, some more Messiaen, some more Ludoslavsky, Philip Glass, and Alfred Schnittke on the same record. Violin concertos, Gideon Kramer, see, Glass and Schnittke. Avant-Garde, it's challenging music, it's not for everybody, but it is for everybody, but it isn't. So I'll end on that commentary. One of the problems with this music, it is now it is sort of designed by academics for other academics. So you're not going to see a lot of concerts for this kind of music, and you're not going to hear it on the radio very often. So that's a little bit of a criticism, is that they're in their own little world, and the general public is not going to experience this music very often, unless something like a breakout like Ligeti gets picked up by Stanley Kubrick, and now people know who he is. But there's zillions of these unusual composers out there with a lot of really interesting music that is just not going to be heard by the general public. In the big cities like LA and San Francisco and New York, you get the opportunity to see some of this experimental music, and you're probably going to have a hard time seeing it if in other parts of the world. You got to really keep your eyes out for it. But please don't be frightened by it. You might be frightened by it, but try it out. See what you think. Challenge your ears. And that is avant-garde music in my collection. Let me know your comments. Thank you for watching, guys.